The desert had a way of swallowing sound. By late afternoon, even the cicadas had gone quiet, as though they too could sense the storm rolling in. The wind began as a low whisper along the dry gulch, then rose into a furious roar that carried the weight of 1,000 miles of dust. The sky turned copper, then brown, then a heavy, suffocating gray that blotted out the sun. Koa, a tall Apache warrior with skin darkened by years of sun and battle, pulled his horse to a halt on the edge of the abandoned mining town. The animal shuddered, nostrils flaring. Koa's sharp eyes scanned the horizon. He'd seen storms like this before, Deu. They could peel the flesh off a man if he didn't find shelter fast. The ghost town would have to do. The place had been called Copper Bend, but there was no copper, no miners, and no life left to bend toward. Shuttered buildings leaned like drunkards, doors half-hanging, roofs half-gone. Koa led his horse into what used to be a saloon, now just walls of splintered boards and a bar that sagged like an old spine. He tied the reins to a post, covered the horse with a blanket, and turned to brace the doorway with a plank. That's when he heard it, a sound barely distinguishable from the howling wind, a woman's voice, faint, frantic. He stepped back outside, squinting into the storm. For a moment, the dust parted like curtains, and he saw her, a figure stumbling through the haze, wrapped in a tattered shawl, clutching a leather satchel to her chest. Her skirt was tangled around her boots, and every step looked like it might be her last. "Hey," Koa shouted, his voice swallowed by the wind. He moved toward her, covering his mouth with his arm, eyes burning from grit. When he reached her, she was on her knees, coughing violently, her face streaked with dirt and tears. He caught her before she fell forward, feeling the lightness of her frame. Too thin, too weak. "Easy," he said, his voice low but firm. "You'll choke on this air." She tried to pull away, but her body had no strength left. "Don't touch me," she rasped, blinking through the dust. "Please, I'm not here to hurt you," Koa said, tightening his hold just enough to keep her steady. "Come, you'll die out here." With that, he half-carried, half-guided her back to the saloon. Inside, he set her down on the wooden floor and pulled the door shut behind them. The wind rattled the boards, howling through cracks like the cry of lost spirits. For several long moments, the woman said nothing. She just sat there, gasping for air, her shawl slipping from her shoulders. When she finally lifted her head, Koa saw the face of someone who had once known comfort, her skin pale beneath the dust, her hair golden brown and tangled, her eyes a clear, startling green. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Koa," he said simply, kneeling to pour water from his canteen into a tin cup. "Drink." She hesitated, eyes darting toward the knife strapped at his side. But thirst won out. She took the cup, hands trembling, and drank like someone who hadn't tasted water in days. When she handed it back, her gaze softened, just a little. "You're Apache," she said quietly. "Yes, I didn't think you'd help me," Koa shrugged. "Storm doesn't care who you are. It kills just the same." Her lips curved, almost a smile, almost gratitude. "My name's Clara Whitmore." He nodded once. Outside, thunder rolled across the desert like a drum. Koa leaned against the wall, watching her with guarded curiosity. She looked too refined for this place, a woman who didn't belong among the ruin and dust. "What were you doing out there alone?" he asked. Her eyes flickered toward the satchel she'd never let go of. "Running," she said at last, "and praying I'd make it far enough that no one would find me." Koa's gaze followed hers to the satchel. "From what?" She took a deep breath, meeting his eyes. "From a man who swore he owned me." The storm outside raged on, but inside that crumbling saloon, two strangers sat across from each other, both carrying secrets heavy as the desert wind. And neither yet knew that fate had just tied their paths together. The storm dragged on well into the night, its roar like a living thing circling the broken town. Every gust sent dust sifting through the cracks in the saloon walls. Koa fed the dying fire in the hearth with scraps of timber and an old chair leg, watching the orange glow chase the shadows away. The woman, Clara Whitmore, sat wrapped in a horse blanket, eyes half-lidded, too tired to be afraid anymore. She looked fragile in the firelight. Her hands were raw, her face smudged, yet something in her posture still carried a hint of defiance, like a flower that had refused to wilt even after the world around it had turned to sand. Koa poured what was left of his beans into a small pot and set it over the fire. "You should eat," he said quietly. "I'm not hungry," she murmured. He glanced over his shoulder. You haven't eaten since yesterday. I can tell. She hesitated, then sighed, surrendering to the gentle authority in his tone. When he handed her the pot, she took it in both hands, as if afraid he might change his mind. She ate slowly, and after a few bites, her expression softened. You cook better than most men I've met, Koa smirked faintly. Hunger makes everything taste better. Silence stretched between them, filled only by the crackle of the fire and the faint hiss of wind outside. Then Clara spoke again, voice quieter this time. You said the storm kills everyone the same. That's true, I suppose. But not everyone would have risked their life for a stranger. Koa stirred the coals with a stick, his eyes far away. I've seen too many die in the dust. One more won't make it easier to forget. Her gaze lingered on him. You've lost people. He nodded once, saying nothing more. His silence told her enough. For a while they just listened to the wind. The walls groaned with every gust, and the smell of the storm, dry, sharp, electric, seeped through the gaps. Clara drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. You live out here alone? I travel, Koa replied. Sometimes I trade horses, sometimes I hunt. The land's quieter than towns. She looked down at her hands. Quieter, but lonelier. Koa didn't answer that. He didn't need to. When the wind finally began to die down, Koa stood and pushed open the door a crack. The storm had left a thick layer of sand across the street, half burying the wooden steps. The sky beyond was a deep bruised violet, heavy with the scent of rain that would never fall. It's easing, he said. You'll rest here tonight? I'll take the doorway. Clara looked up sharply. You don't have to sleep outside. I trust you. Koa's lips curved faintly. That makes one of us. She frowned, unsure whether he was joking. I mean it, she said softly. If you meant me harm, you'd have done it already. Koa leaned against the door frame, his tall frame outlined by the last embers of firelight. You don't know what men are capable of, Clara. Her voice trembled. Oh, I do. That's why I ran. The quiet returned. Thicker this time, heavier. She turned away, pulling the blanket up to her chin, but her eyes stayed open. Koa could feel them on him, curious and cautious at once. After a long pause, he asked, Where were you headed before the storm? Clara hesitated. I didn't have a place, just away. From this man you spoke of? She nodded, then stared into the flames. Silas Reed. He owns half the valley near Prescott. My father arranged the marriage. He said it was God's will. But Silas doesn't believe in God, only in what he can buy. Koa folded his arms. And you took something from him? Her eyes flicked toward the satchel lying by her side. Something that belonged to me first. Koa didn't ask what. He understood the weight of running with something worth killing for. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her. Her head tilted against the wall and her breathing steadied. Koa watched her for a moment, the stubborn curve of her jaw, the faint scar on her wrist, then turned back to the door, keeping guard. Outside, the wind moaned through the ruins of Copper Bend like the ghosts of miners long gone. Koa stood silently, his knife at his hip, eyes scanning the darkness. He had no reason to protect her. She was trouble, he could sense it already. But something deeper, something older than reason, had already taken hold. When dawn crept over the horizon, the storm had passed. The desert was still and golden once more. Clara stirred, rubbing her eyes as the light touched her face. Koa turned from the door and met her gaze. You made it through the night, he said softly. She smiled faintly. Thanks to you. He nodded once, but there was no pride in his expression, only awareness. The storm outside had ended, but the one inside both of them was just beginning. The morning after the storm dawned crisp and strangely peaceful. The air smelled of dust and wet sage, the kind of clean that only follows destruction. Sunlight poured through cracks in the old saloon walls, catching the drifting motes like floating gold. Clara stretched beneath the horse blanket, her body aching from the hard floor. But for the first time in days, she didn't feel hunted, at least not by men, only by memories. Koa was already awake, his shirt off, shoulders glistening with sweat as he worked outside. Through a broken window, Clara could see him hauling debris, clearing the path for his horse. Every motion was quiet power, efficient, grounded, patient. Something about the sight made her pulse quicken in a way she didn't understand, and it startled her enough to pull her gaze away. She brushed her hair with her fingers and looked down at herself. Her once blue dress was caked in dirt, stiff from dried sweat and sand. The hem was torn nearly to the knee and her skin itched from sleeping in it. She needed to change, to feel human again. but she couldn't very well ask him for privacy in a ghost town with no doors left standing. Still, she decided she'd risk it. After he stepped outside to check the water barrel, she gathered her cleanest underthings from her satchel and slipped out the back door, clutching her worn skirt to her chest. The air was warm already, and she found a half-collapsed barn behind the saloon. Just enough walls left to shield her modesty. She peeled off her dress, shaking out sand and grit, muttering to herself, "Good Lord, if you're still watching, please look away." But the wind, it seemed, had other ideas. As she hung her skirt over a fence post to beat the dust from it, a sudden gust swept through the yard. The fabric snapped like a sail, then, in one cruel twist of fate, tore right from her hands. Clara let out a yelp as her only decent skirt sailed into the open, tumbling across the sand like a tumbleweed. She darted after it, clutching at it helplessly, forgetting entirely that she was left in nothing but her drawers and a thin white chemise. She caught up to the skirt just as it snagged on a cactus. Triumph turned instantly to horror when she heard a low voice behind her. "Clara?" She froze. Her stomach dropped. Slowly she turned. Koa stood at the corner of the barn, eyes wide in stunned silence. His hand still held a water bucket, but his gaze had dropped, unbidden, helplessly, to where her bare legs caught the morning light. His chest rose and fell, and for once the calm warrior looked completely undone. The silence stretched. Then in a voice rough with disbelief, he muttered under his breath, "Sweet Jesus." "Your trouble." Clara's mouth fell open. Her cheeks flamed so hot she thought she might combust right there in the dust. "Turn around," she squeaked, grabbing her skirt and fumbling to cover herself. Koa blinked, startled from his trance, and spun around immediately, though the faintest grin tugged at his mouth. "I wasn't— Don't you dare finish that sentence!" she snapped. He raised his hands in surrender, his back still turned. "The wind took your clothes, not me. That's not funny." "Didn't say it was." Clara yanked her skirt back on and stomped toward him, though the anger in her voice didn't quite hide the embarrassment, or the strange flutter in her chest. When she finally stood before him, fully dressed, Koa risked glancing back. Her hair was a wild mess, her cheeks flushed crimson, her eyes bright with fury, or maybe something close to it. He almost smiled again, but stopped himself. "Are you done staring?" she demanded. Koa's voice was calm, but the edge of amusement lingered. "You're safe now. From the wind, at least." She exhaled sharply, half furious, half mortified, then grabbed her shawl and turned away. You have no manners at all," he shrugged. "Didn't say I did." For a few moments, neither spoke. Then Clara's laughter, soft, reluctant, broke the silence. "I suppose the desert has a strange way of humbling people," she said, still looking away. Koa allowed himself a quiet chuckle. "It humbles everyone, even me." Their eyes met, and just like that, the tension between them changed shape. It was no longer embarrassment alone. It was awareness. When she brushed past him to go inside, he said lowly, "Next time, wait for me to turn my back before the wind does." She paused at the door, half smiling despite herself. "Next time, I'll tie my skirt down." For the rest of the day, they worked side by side to fix the roof and tend the horses. Neither mentioned what had happened, but the moment hung between them, bright as sunlight and twice as dangerous. By evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the desert gold, Koa caught her looking at him again. This time she didn't look away, and though neither of them spoke it aloud, both knew the wind had only begun to stir. By the second evening in Copper Bend, the storm's memory had faded, but something else had taken its place. A quiet, unpredictable tension that neither Clara nor Koa seemed able to name aloud. The sun was sinking low behind the ridges, washing the ghost town in orange fire. Koa sat sharpening his knife against a whetstone, the rasping sound rhythmic and calm. Clara sat across from him on the saloon's porch steps, brushing out her tangled hair with the small comb she'd salvaged from her satchel. The silence between them wasn't awkward exactly. It was charged, like the still air before lightning. Finally, she broke it. "I'm still waiting for you to apologize." Koa looked up, brows raised. "For saving you?" "For seeing me," she corrected, her eyes narrowing, though a mischievous spark lit behind them. "You had no right." He gave a low hum of amusement. "The wind had the right. I was just an innocent witness." Clara scoffed and tossed a pebble in his direction. It bounced harmlessly off his boot. Innocent? I doubt anyone's called you that in your life. That brought the ghost of a grin to his lips. Maybe once. When I was born. Her laughter came without warning, quick and light, a sound that startled even her. She covered her mouth, but it was too late. The sound filled the air, fluttering between the broken buildings like music that had been missing from this place for years. Koa watched her, expression softening. It suits you, he said. What does? Laughing. You should do it more often. Her cheeks flushed a little, and she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I haven't had much to laugh about lately. Then maybe that's why you ran, he said, setting down the knife. Clara hesitated. You make it sound simple. It is. Life's simpler when you stop pretending you owe anyone your misery. She looked down, his words striking somewhere deep. The firelight from their small camp beside the porch danced across her face, warming the sadness that lingered there. Koa leaned back on one arm, studying her quietly. He could tell she was still carrying something heavy, not just fear but shame, the kind born from too many years of being told what she should be. Tell me about him, Koa said finally. The man you're running from. Clara's expression tightened. Silas. He nodded. He's everything my father thought I wanted, she said, voice quiet but steady, polite, handsome, respected. He came to church every Sunday and bowed lower than everyone else, but only so people would see him do it. She swallowed. The night before our wedding, I overheard him telling his men what he planned to do once he had me. He called me property, said a wife should be broken in like a new horse. Koa's jaw tightened. And your father still gave you to him? He said it was God's plan. She laughed bitterly. I decided God must have changed his mind, and so did I. The silence that followed was heavy but not cold. Koa stood and walked to the edge of the porch, gazing toward the fading light. You did right to run, her eyes lifted to him. Do you believe that? He nodded once. Freedom's the only thing worth running toward. Everything else just follows after. Clara rose, stepping closer, the boards creaking under her boots. And what are you running from, Koa? He didn't answer immediately. For a moment, only the wind replied, soft and low. Then he said, the same thing you are. A past that keeps calling me back. Their eyes met. The distance between them, a mere arm's length, felt charged with something neither could ignore anymore. Clara swallowed, her voice dropping to a whisper. You ever get tired of running? Koa's dark eyes flicked down to her lips, then back up. Only when I meet someone who makes me want to stop. The air seemed to thicken. Clara's breath caught, and for a long, fragile heartbeat, the world held still. Then, as if to break the spell, she laughed again, nervous this time. You have an answer for everything, don't you? He smirked faintly. Only when I mean it. She turned away, pretending to busy herself with the fire, though her hands trembled slightly. Your trouble, Koa, he chuckled, echoing his own words from the day before. Sweet Jesus, I think that makes two of us. Her laughter returned, genuine and warm this time. The sound blended with the wind, and for the first time since she'd fled her old life, Clara felt safe, dangerously safe. Because now she wasn't sure what frightened her more, the men chasing her, or the man sitting beside her who made her forget she was running at all. The peace that had briefly settled over Copper Bend ended the next morning with the sound of hoofbeats. Koa heard them first, distant but distinct, a rhythm that didn't belong to the wild mustangs of the valley. He froze mid-motion as he was packing his saddlebag, eyes narrowing toward the eastern ridge. The faint dust cloud rising against the dawn light told him enough. Riders, at least 4, maybe 5, and they were coming straight for the town. Clara was still asleep inside the saloon, curled under the horse blanket. Koa walked to the doorway and watched her for a long moment. The fragile quiet of her breathing, the soft strand of hair across her cheek. It all made what he had to do harder. He touched her shoulder gently. Clara, wake up. She stirred, blinking, then sat up. What's wrong? Men coming, Koa said, his voice low and firm. Too many to be traitors. Her blood ran cold. Silas's men? He didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told her everything. Clara's hands trembled as she clutched the edge of the blanket. How did they find me? Doesn't matter, Koa said, already moving. We ride north. They won't expect you to cross Apache land. But he shot her a look that silenced her. You want to live? You listen. Within minutes they were outside, the horses saddled and ready. Clara's mare was smaller, skittish from the storm, but Koa steadied it with a hand to its muzzle. "She'll follow mine," he said. "Don't pull the reins too tight." Clara climbed up clumsily, still half-dressed and shaken. Koa swung easily onto his stallion, his posture straight, every movement controlled. He glanced once toward the rising dust cloud. "Closer now." "Hold on," he said. They rode out through the far side of town just as the first gunshot echoed. A bullet split the air above Clara's head, splintering a post beside her. She gasped and ducked, clinging to the saddle horn. Koa spurred his horse faster, leading her down a dry ravine that cut behind the hills. "Keep low," he called over the thunder of hooves. "Don't stop." Clara's heart pounded so violently she could barely breathe. The wind whipped her hair across her face and her eyes watered from dust. Behind them, shouts carried through the canyons. Rough, cruel voices she recognized even over the chaos. "Find her. Reed wants her alive." Koa's jaw clenched. He guided them into a narrow canyon shaded by cliffs, where the echo of the riders began to fade. When they finally slowed to a stop, Clara was shaking. Her hands were raw from gripping the reins. Koa swung down first, scanning the ridges. "They're tracking slow," he said, more to himself than to her. Storm wiped out their trails. "We've got an hour, maybe two." Clara slid from the saddle, her legs buckling slightly. "You're risking your life for me," she whispered. "They'll kill you if they catch you." He looked at her sharply. "Let them try." She stared at him, the calm in his voice, the way his hand rested near his rifle. And for the first time, she saw what true danger looked like. Not loud or boastful, but steady, deadly, controlled. Still, she shook her head. "You don't even know me." Koa's gaze softened. "I know what it's like to be hunted." The wind swept through the canyon, carrying the faint smell of creosote and gunpowder. Clara wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Where will we go?" "There's an old waterhole beyond the red mesas," Koa said. "Hidden by stone. We'll camp there till night, then cross into tribal ground. And if they follow, then they'll regret it." For a moment, silence hung between them again. That same charged quiet from before, only now thickened by adrenaline and fear. Clara's voice trembled when she said, "You didn't have to do this, Koa. You could have left me in Copper Bend." He met her eyes, his expression unreadable. "Maybe, but I didn't." Something in his tone, flat, simple, certain, made her chest tighten. She wanted to say thank you, but the words felt too small for what he'd done. Instead, she whispered, "You really think we can make it?" Koa turned toward his horse, checking the saddle straps. "We'll make it if you trust me." "I do," she said quietly. He paused, glancing back at her. The truth in her eyes caught him off guard. So open, so unguarded, it felt like a promise. Before he could reply, a distant echo of hooves broke the silence. Koa cursed under his breath and grabbed her reins. "Time's up. Mount up, Clara." They rode again, higher into the red mesas where the land turned wild and unforgiving. Every turn, every rise carried danger, but also something else stirring between them. When the sun sank behind the stone ridges, Clara looked over her shoulder one last time. The men were gone from sight, but not from her mind. She turned back toward Koa, riding ahead, strong and steady, a silent promise in motion. And for the first time since she'd fled her old life, she wasn't running alone. The desert unfolded before them like a living painting. Red earth and wide sky, dotted with mesquite and sagebrush that whispered when the wind passed through. The air shimmered with heat by day and bit cold by night. Out there, beneath the endless horizon, there was no law but survival. And Clara quickly learned that Koa understood it like a language. For 3 days, they rode hard and spoke little. The silence wasn't unfriendly. It was purposeful, the kind that belonged to people who'd seen too much noise in their lives. Clara followed every motion Koa made. When he raised his hand, she stopped. When he turned his head toward the wind, she held her breath. Trust came not from words, but from the way he led. Never hesitant, never unsure. The second evening, they reached a narrow ravine lined with boulders and dry grass. Koa dismounted, scanning the cliffs. "We rest here," he said. "The horses need water." Clara slid down from her saddle, stumbling slightly. Her thighs burned from the long ride, her lips cracked from thirst. Koa led both horses to a shallow pool fed by a thin trickle from the rocks. Clara knelt beside it, cupping her hands to drink. The water was warm and metallic, but it felt like heaven on her tongue. Koa crouched nearby, silent as always, his dark eyes sweeping the horizon. Clara glanced at him from the corner of her eye. You always this quiet? He didn't look up. Only when talking might get me killed. She smirked faintly. You think I'd talk you to death? He finally looked at her then, and the faintest ghost of a smile crossed his lips. No, but you might make me forget to listen. Clara blinked, thrown off balance by the simple honesty of it. She turned back to the water, pretending not to hear the warmth in his tone. When night fell, Koa built a fire and roasted what little they had, a jackrabbit he'd snared at dusk and a few roots he'd found along the ridge. The flames painted his face in amber light, highlighting the sharp angles of his jaw, the calm focus in his eyes. Clara sat across from him, her shawl drawn tight, watching the sparks drift up toward the stars. I never realized how loud the world was, she said softly. Back home there was always something. Bells, voices, gossip. Out here it's just quiet, Koa nodded. The desert doesn't waste breath on noise. I like that, she murmured. It feels honest. He tore a piece of meat from the bone and handed it to her. The desert doesn't lie. It shows what people are made of. Clara took the food, their fingers brushing briefly. The touch was accidental, fleeting, but it lingered. Her heart skipped in a way that made her angry with herself. She was supposed to be running from men like Silas, not sitting by fires with ones who made her feel seen. Still, she couldn't help it. What's it made of you, Koa? She asked. He stared into the fire. Hard ground, thick skin, and enough scars to remind me where I've been. Clara's voice softened. You talk like someone who's lost too much. I have. He glanced at her and his tone changed. But you still believe there's something waiting ahead. Is that bad? She asked, smiling faintly. No, he said after a moment. It's dangerous. Hope gets people killed out here. Clara's eyes held his. Then I guess I'll die hoping. That made him chuckle, a quiet, genuine sound that caught her off guard. The tension that had been building since Copper Bend seemed to shift into something warmer, steadier. Hours passed. The fire burned low. Overhead, the stars glimmered like pinpricks in a black ocean. Clara lay on her blanket, watching Koa sit by the embers, sharpening his knife out of habit. Do you ever sleep? She asked drowsily. When I'm safe, he said. You don't feel safe now? He looked at her, eyes softened by the flickering light. Not with you this close. Her breath hitched, caught between a laugh and something deeper. She turned on her side, facing away to hide her blush. Then I'll make sure not to move. Don't make promises you can't keep, he murmured. Clara smiled to herself, eyes closing as exhaustion claimed her. Somewhere in the dark, she heard him shift closer. Not enough to touch, just enough for his shadow to fall across hers. For the first time in years, she slept without fear, and when dawn came, painting the red rocks gold, Koa was still there, silent, watchful, as though he'd guarded her dreams through the night. By the fourth day, the heat pressed down like a living weight. The horses moved slower, their flanks dark with sweat. Clara's throat was dry no matter how much she drank, and her dress clung to her in dusty folds. Every muscle in her body ached from riding, yet she refused to complain. Koa never did. When the canyon walls opened into a low valley, she spotted something glittering ahead, a winding ribbon of blue cutting through the red earth. Water! She gasped, her voice raw from dust. Koa's head lifted sharply. The Verde, he said. Good eyes. They pushed on until the river widened before them. Shallow, clear, with patches of green reeds along the edges. The sound of it was music after so many days of silence. Koa dismounted first, scanning the banks with practiced caution. Once satisfied, he nodded. We'll stop here. The horses need rest. Clara didn't wait for a second invitation. She dropped the reins, kicked off her boots, and waded straight in. The water was cold enough to sting, but it felt like heaven. She laughed. An unguarded full sound that startled even her. Koa watched from the bank, one hand on his belt knife, eyes flicking between her and the tree line. But slowly the tension in his shoulders eased. He had seen soldiers, bandits, and worse things in his life, but not many women who could walk into a wild river like it belonged to them. Clara splashed water over her face, scrubbing at the dust. You could join me, you know, she called, half teasing. Someone has to keep watch, he said, though his tone carried an edge of something else. Wariness, perhaps. Or temptation. She tilted her head, her smile playful. And if I promise not to let you drown? Koa shook his head but finally removed his belt, then his shirt, a slow, deliberate motion. Clara froze mid-laugh. His body was carved from hard labor and lean strength, every muscle defined, every scar telling its own quiet story. He waded in without another word. The current rippled around him, sunlight glinting off his bronze skin. Clara turned away quickly, pretending to focus on the sky, though her heart was drumming so hard she was sure he could hear it. "You stare too long at the sun," he said evenly. "And it burns." Her mouth went dry. "And you talk too much for a man who swore to keep watch." That earned her a quiet chuckle. They bathed in silence for a while, Koa methodical and efficient, Clara trying not to look where her eyes kept wanting to wander. She dunked her head beneath the surface, letting the water wash away more than dust. It rinsed out fear, guilt, and all the city-bred manners that didn't belong in this raw open world. When she surfaced, Koa was closer, no longer at the far side of the stream but only a few paces away. His hair hung wet against his shoulders and droplets clung to his lashes like stars. "You're different out here," he said quietly. "So are you," she replied, her voice softer than she intended. "Out here you almost look human," he smirked faintly. "Almost? Maybe a little too much like trouble." His dark eyes held hers. "And you look like someone who hasn't decided whether to run or to stay." Clara's pulse fluttered. "Maybe I'm tired of running." The air between them grew thick with things neither dared to name. The river moved lazily around them, the only sound between their breaths. Then, almost as if drawn by some shared gravity, Koa reached out and brushed a strand of wet hair from her cheek. His fingers lingered just long enough to send a shiver down her spine. She didn't pull away. Not right then, but before either could speak, a sound cut through the stillness, distant, echoing. A horse's whinny. Koa's body went rigid. He turned toward the riverbank, eyes narrowing. "Riders," he said under his breath. "3, maybe 4. Clara's heart dropped. Silas? Maybe, or worse. In an instant, the spell between them shattered. Koa was out of the water, moving fast, pulling his shirt on, tightening his belt, strapping his rifle across his shoulder. Clara scrambled after him, fear slicing through the haze of warmth that had wrapped around her moments before. "Stay low," he ordered, his tone sharp now, all business. They crouched behind a cluster of rocks as dust rose on the horizon, riders approaching fast, sunlight glinting off metal. Koa's jaw tightened. "He found us," Clara's breath caught. "What do we do?" Koa glanced at her, eyes fierce and calm all at once. "We survived together." And as the riders closed in, Clara realized the truth. The river might have washed away the dust, but it had also revealed something deeper. She wasn't just running anymore. She was fighting for something, for someone, for him. The sound came first, the rhythmic thunder of hooves drumming against the hard desert floor. Then, as the dust thickened, Clara saw them. 4 men on horseback, silhouettes dark against the sun, riding hard and fast. Even from a distance, she could see the flash of rifles and the glint of brass buttons. Her stomach twisted. She knew that stance, that arrogance. It could only be Silas Turner and the men he'd bought with his money and fear. Koa crouched beside her, one knee in the dust, eyes narrowed. He watched the riders the way a wolf studies a pack, calm, assessing, patient. Every muscle in his body was coiled tight. "Stay behind the rocks," he said quietly. "If they fire, don't run toward the horses, and they'll aim for movement." Clara nodded, though her throat felt too dry for words. The riders slowed as they reached the river's edge. Silas was in front, broad-shouldered, his fine town coat caked with dust. His face, once smooth and charming, now burned with fury. "Clara," he shouted, his voice slicing through the canyon. "You think you can humiliate me and get away with it?" His horse pawed at the ground as he pulled his revolver free. "Come out now or I'll shoot your lover first." Clara's blood ran cold. Koa didn't move. He waited, his breathing steady, eyes locked on the lead rider. In one smooth motion he loaded his Winchester, the click of the lever cutting through the tension like a blade. Silas's men shifted uneasily. One of them, a wiry young ranch hand, muttered, "Boss, maybe she ain't." "Shut up," Silas barked. His eyes scanned the riverbank, searching the rocks. "I know you're out there, Clara. You think hiding behind a savage will save you?" That was the moment Koa moved. He rose from behind the rocks in a blur of motion. calm, deliberate, a shadow against the light. His rifle came up, aimed steady. "She's not hiding," Koa said, his voice low and hard as flint. "You're just too blind to see when something's already lost to you." For a moment, everything stopped. Even the horses seemed to sense it, the sharp stillness before the storm breaks. Then Silas snarled, "Kill him!" The first shot cracked the silence. Koa dropped to one knee, returning fire. The sound echoed off the canyon walls, wild and deafening. Clara flinched, ducking low as bullets tore into the riverbank, splintering rock and scattering dust. Koa's shot found its mark. One rider tumbled from his saddle with a cry, hitting the ground hard. The others panicked, firing wildly. Koa moved like a ghost, reloading, firing, never wasting a single motion. Clara could only watch, half in terror, half in awe. He wasn't just fighting to survive. He was fighting for her. Then, in the chaos, she saw Silas circle wide, aiming his revolver toward the rocks where she hid. His face twisted with hate. "You belong to me, Clara," he roared. Clara didn't think, she just moved. She grabbed the small pistol Koa had given her days earlier and rose from cover. Her hands shook, but her aim was true. "Not anymore," she said, voice trembling but fierce. She fired. The shot hit Silas's shoulder, spinning him in the saddle. He cursed, dropping his gun, clutching at the wound. His horse reared, throwing him hard into the dust. Koa was beside her in an instant, pulling her down just as another bullet whistled past. He fired twice more, clean, efficient. One more rider fell. The last turned and fled, his horse galloping hard into the open plain. Silence fell again, broken only by the sound of the river and Silas's labored breathing. He was crawling toward his revolver, blood staining his fine coat. Koa stepped forward, rifle aimed. "Don't," Silas froze. His eyes flicked between Koa and Clara, hate burning through the pain. "You'll regret this," he spat. "You think he cares for you?" "You're just another—" Clara cut him off, her voice steady. "You talk too much, Silas." Koa's gaze held hers for a long moment. Then he lowered his weapon. "He's not worth the bullet." They left him there, beaten, broken, and staring after them as they mounted their horses and rode toward the rising sun. The air smelled of gunpowder and victory, and something else. Freedom. Clara didn't look back. She couldn't. As they rode, she felt the tremor still in her hands. Koa reached over, covering her fingers with his, warm, steady, grounding. "You did what you had to," he said softly. "I didn't think I could," she whispered. He looked at her then, eyes deep and unreadable. "You've always been stronger than you thought," and for the first time she believed him. Night came quietly, as though the desert itself needed rest after all the violence that had scorched it that day. The stars rose pale and cold above them, and the river whispered softly as if trying to wash away what had been done. Clara sat by the fire, her knees pulled to her chest, staring into the flames. Her hands still shook, not from fear but from the echo of adrenaline. She could still see it. Silas falling, blood staining the dust, the look in his eyes when he realized she'd stopped being afraid of him. Koa was across from her, silent as always, tending to his rifle. The flicker of firelight caught the hard lines of his face, the glint of sweat and dust along his skin. There was no boast in him, no pride, just that same stillness, the kind that comes after a storm, when the air is thick and every sound feels too loud. "You're hurt," Clara said finally. Her voice was soft, but it cut through the quiet. He glanced up. "No worse than usual," she frowned. "You're bleeding, Koa." He looked down as if just noticing. A bullet had grazed his shoulder, not deep, but enough to paint a dark streak down his arm. Clara stood before he could stop her, went to her saddlebag and took out a strip of cloth. "Sit," she said firmly. He almost smiled at her tone. "You give orders now?" "Only when you're too stubborn to follow sense." He sat. She knelt beside him, hands gentle but sure as she cleaned the wound with water from her canteen. His skin was hot under her fingers, his muscles tense but still. The smell of gunpowder and sweat clung to him, mixed with something earthier. Wild sage, smoke, and desert rain. Koa watched her closely, his eyes dark and unreadable. "You didn't hesitate," he said quietly. "What?" "When you shot him," Clara's hands paused. "If I had, I'd be dead." "Or worse," he nodded once, eyes steady on hers. "You did what you had to. But it'll stay with you." She tied the cloth around his shoulder, tightening it carefully. It already does. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat neither looked away. Something passed between them. Not just gratitude, but recognition. The kind that only two survivors could share. The fire popped, sending a shower of sparks into the dark. Clara sat back on her heels, suddenly aware of how close they were. The night air pressed cool against her skin, but heat rolled off him in waves. I don't know what happens now, she admitted softly. I've spent my whole life running from men who wanted to own me. I don't even know what it means to stand still anymore. Koa leaned forward slightly, elbows on his knees. Then don't stand still, ride, see what's past that horizon. Alone? His mouth curved, the faintest shadow of a smile. You could do that, she hesitated, but maybe you don't have to. The words hit her harder than any bullet could have. Clara looked down at her hands, small, calloused now, not the hands of a lady anymore. You'd really keep riding with me? If you'll have me, he said. His voice was steady, but something vulnerable hid beneath it. I've been alone a long time, Clara. Too long. For the first time since they met, she reached out, not to help, not to heal, but simply to touch. Her hand brushed his cheek, rough with stubble and warm from the fire. You make me forget to be afraid, she whispered. He turned his face slightly into her palm. Then I'll take that as my purpose. For a long moment, they stayed like that, two broken pieces of different worlds finding, somehow, that they fit. When she finally drew back, the stars had brightened above them, scattered across the black like spilled salt. The night was wide and quiet, but the silence between them was no longer heavy. It hummed with something alive, something growing. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, careful of his bandage. He didn't move, just rested a hand lightly against her hair. Thank you, she murmured. For what? For seeing me. Not who I was. Not what they wanted me to be, just me. Koa's voice was low, almost a whisper. That's the only you I've ever seen. She smiled. Small, tired, real. The desert wind sighed through the canyon, and the river kept its soft murmur. They stayed like that until sleep finally came, not as fugitives or outlaws anymore, but as something new. Two souls finding peace, at last, in the same silence. Tomorrow would bring new dangers. But for tonight, beneath the endless western stars, Clara knew one thing for certain. She wasn't running anymore. Morning arrived like a promise. Pale gold light spilled across the desert floor, turning the dust into glitter and the river into a ribbon of fire. A cool wind brushed through the canyon, carrying the scent of sage and wet stone. The world, for a fleeting moment, felt reborn. Clara woke first. She blinked against the soft light, momentarily disoriented by the vastness of the open land around her. The quiet, the endless horizon, the way the sunrise made everything seem possible again. Koa was still beside her, sleeping lightly, his hand resting near his rifle even in rest. His face was calm now, the hard lines softened by peace she hadn't seen before. She sat there for a long time, just watching him. The man who had walked into her chaos and never once asked her to apologize for it. The fire had burned to embers. Clara rose quietly, feeding it a few twigs, then went down to the river to wash her face. The water was icy, shocking her fully awake. She stared at her reflection, hair tangled, eyes red from smoke and tears, dress torn at the hem. Yet there was something new there too. Strength. Maybe even freedom. Behind her, she heard the faint jingle of tack, and turned to see Koa leading the horses from the shade of the trees. He'd tied a fresh bandage on his shoulder, though it was clear it still hurt. You should rest another day, she said. He shook his head. If Turner lived, he'll send others. Best we keep moving, she nodded. Then where to? Koa paused, looking toward the far ridge where the sky met the desert. North, he said. There's land up there, green in spring, good soil. A river that doesn't dry up. Maybe a place to start over. The word struck something deep inside her. Start over, she repeated softly, as if tasting them for the first time. I never thought I'd get to do that. He looked at her then, really looked. You earned it. They broke camp in silence, moving with the easy rhythm that had grown between them. No words were needed. They had learned each other's patterns. When to lead, when to follow, when to simply exist side by side. As they rode out of the canyon, the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows behind them. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, wild and unclaimed. Clara glanced over at Koa. He rode tall and quiet, his profile cut sharp against the bright horizon. "You'll leave me when we get there?" she asked suddenly. He turned to her, eyes steady. "Do you want me to?" She hesitated. "I don't know what I want anymore." Koa nodded slowly. "Then we'll find out together." They rode on in silence for a while, the wind tugging at Clara's hair, the horses' hooves thudding softly on packed earth. Each mile between them and Copper Bend felt like a layer of the past peeling away, the lies, the fear, the shame, all left behind in the dust. By midday, they reached a ridge overlooking the valley below, greener than anything Clara had seen in months. Cottonwoods lined a distant creek, their leaves flashing silver in the sun. Koa stopped his horse, scanning the land with the quiet reverence of someone who understood what it meant to belong nowhere for too long. "This is it," he said simply. Clara looked out over the valley, tears pricking her eyes. "It's beautiful," he smiled faintly. "It'll do." For a long moment they just sat there side by side, the wind lifting their hair, the world wide open before them. Then Clara turned to him, voice low. "What now, Koa?" He met her gaze, steady, certain, warm. "Now," he said, "we live." It wasn't a grand declaration. It wasn't a vow. It was something quieter, real, enduring, the kind of promise that doesn't need words carved in stone. Clara reached out, taking his hand. Their fingers laced together, calloused and strong. She felt the pulse beneath his skin, the steady rhythm of a man who had carried her through fire and fear and brought her into the light. They sat that way for a long time, the wind whispering through the grass, the horses grazing quietly nearby. And when the sun began its slow climb toward noon, Koa leaned closer and said softly, "We'll ride until the world feels big enough for us." Clara smiled, eyes glistening. "The world's already big, Koa. I just needed someone to remind me I'm allowed to take up space in it." He squeezed her hand, and without another word they rode down the ridge, two silhouettes moving toward the horizon, their shadows stretching long behind them. The desert wind carried away the dust of who they'd been. Ahead lay only open land, sunlight, and a story still being written. And for the first time in her life, Clara didn't feel lost. She felt found.